Hey everybody, welcome back to more Showdown in the Badlands reveals. And we've got not quite all the Mage cards, we've got most of them, but we're missing one legendary, which is going to assume be released at BlizzCon. So, since it's going to BlizzCon, I'm going to assume it's one hell of a card. Unless they're just debating as it gets released later on in the schedule. So, as I said, it's all but the legendaries that have been revealed so far. Or one of the legendaries, sorry. Also, we were, if you remember, during the neutral reveal, we were shown this Blast Mage Miner, a 6-mana 4/4 minion with Battlecry, excavate a treasure. For each card in your hand, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. And we mentioned this was very similar to Meteorologist from the past, just with 1/1 on the stats. And it gives you an excavation, but Meteorologist in the past saw no play, and Blast Mage Miner, I think, to see play, basically we did need an archetype around it to make the excavation worth doing, right? I still don't think it's quite worth it. And just as a reminder, before I go into this, because spoilers, I'm going to be a bit harsh on some of these Mage cards because I don't think they're particularly good. I mean they're not particularly good when I'm comparing them to the deck right now that everyone is running. So if anyone's been following the Master Sword, which is going on literally as I speak right now, of the 16 players, 15 of them brought Mage, and of those, 14 of them brought what I would call the Rainbow Sith Mage deck. And one person brought Naga Mage, which I don't think that went particularly well, to be honest with you, but that by the side, this has probably been the deck of the tour so far, between this and Odin Warrior. So these, I think, are the two tier 1 decks right now. So I'm kind of comparing these cards versus that deck, and the problem with comparing it to that deck is, at its heart, that deck is a combo deck. So control cards, and I would say Blast Mage Miner definitely meets that value control option. I'm not going to be good against it, so that is going to be the forewarning for this reveal. Anyway, to know how good Excavate is, let's see what the Excavation treasure is for Mage. It is the Azurite Hawk. Again, it seems like all these treasures are going to be Elemental Beasts. This is a 4/5/5 beast. With the Battle Cry, get a random Titan. It costs 1. An immediate parallel could be drawn to this card, Queen Ashara, which did see a lot of play, and even is seeing some play right now in Master Store, fun enough, in Secret Rogue. So Queen Ashara, you cast 3 spells while it's in your hand, you get an ancient relic of some sort. The relic most people pick is the 3-mana... 3-mana get a random colossal minion, it costs 1. So in total you spend 9 mana, but you can split it over 3 turns if you want to. 9 mana for a colossal minion. This is 5 mana for a Titan, which again is random, and I'd argue that a Titan is probably better than a colossal minion, so on paper this is actually a pretty good deal, right? Unfortunately for the Azurite Hawk, casting 3 spells is an easier criteria to meet than the Azurite Hawk's excavating 4 times, in part because I'm going to show some of the other excavation cards, but all the excavation cards are pretty weak, especially the Mage ones seem pretty weak. The neutrals are also understated, so it kind of makes it hard to justify running this Azurite Hawk. But we'll have to see. Also, the other downside to this is that not all Titans are made equal. So we say that, oh great, this Titan, it's going to cost, it's going to cost 1 in total with the Azurite Hawk. That is 5 mana. It's a bit unfair because you also get the 5/5 bundled into that. But for Mage, some of these Titans aren't particularly good, and I've kind of laid these into what are my perceived tiers, but it's kind of hard to say until you know what the excavation deck is going to look like, which, spoilers, I don't think will be a thing. I'd say stuff like Primus, Sargeras, and Amanful are going to be your S tier ones. You've basically discounted, 6 mana, 8 mana, and 7 mana. If you're going to include the Hawk in that, which I think is a bit unfair, then it's, 3, 4, and 2, which is an okay deal. But all of these give you extra value on top of that, and I think that is, at the essence of this excavation deck, what it's going to be. It's going to be some sort of control value deck. And Primus will give you Blood Rune cards, which are good for control. Sargeras is just a guy you have to deal with, right? The imps are going to be on the board every single turn, and it's going to be horrible. And then Amanful might discover you a great card, but also gives you the ability to remove 2 enemy minions. In the middle tier, this is going to kind of depend again on your board state and the rest of your deck. Norganon, obviously a decent Titan. It's the Mage Titan itself. Unfortunately, only discounting 5 mana here, and Norganon, he's kind of give, kind of take. You can make your opponent's turn slower in the next turn, so you can imagine playing this, your Azurite Hawk, it's 5/5 in stats, that's not nothing. You get Norganon, you put Norganon on the board with it, you make your opponent's cards cost 1 more. How do they clear the Azurite Hawk and the Norganon? It's going to be really challenging, so I think that's actually a decent get. But I would say a tier below these, like, big value cards. If you want to go a bit more aggro, Aggramar would be a great choice. You get the weapon, you can start smoking the face, just guarantees you some damage. Again, if you're looking for value, Ionar, what a great card to get a 1-mana version of. That's a 9-mana discount, by the way. And more to the point, Ionar could refresh your mana crystals. So again, if I talk about setting up these threatening board states, if you've got Norganon just in the deck innately, and you Hawk, Ionar, I don't know, play another minion, then refresh your mana crystals, Norganon, then make your opponent's cards cost more, then you can play something else. That is an unbelievably swingy turn. But it will really depend, what you've got in hand, whether or not Ionar is going to be good enough. Also, I forgot to mention, Ionar would give you a 5/5 on top of that, so you could have a giant board with that card. As much as people meme about Yogg, if you got a 1-mana Yogg, it's still 1-mana mind control. Yogg does work in mysterious ways now with the cast 2 random spells, but I don't think it's the worst get. Same with Argus. It's not great, but not the absolute worst thing. The Rush could give you some fast damage, which you might need. The Lifesteal, pretty good for Mage. You don't have access to a lot of good Lifesteal. And you can get some value from discovering Death Rattle cards. You can get... I can't remember what the other ones are on that one. It's make your minions cheap, right? And I forgot what the other one is. Oh, it's to get 4 2/2s, right? That sets up a board state that, Warrior wouldn't be able to beat through very easily. And then in the lower tier, I've got Golganeth in there. You're only getting a 5-mana discount. You won't have Overload cards in your deck, so that part of the aspect is pointless. The heal could be nice, but, is it worth it? Possibly not. And I'd also say the other one, which is do 20 damage to a minion, pretty weak. Actually, the best thing about Golganeth, and why I've not put him at the very bottom, is that your first spell each turn costs 3 less. That could be important for Mage, important enough that you would probably want to clear it off fairly quickly. Then we have Amatus, a decent discount, but Mage typically not minion-based. I'm not sure this deck will be minion-based, or heavily minion-based. So I don't think Amatus is going to be great, but there is a card in that lets you draw 2 minions at 2/2. If you've got value cards in your deck, you might be happy that they're 2-mana 2/2s, right? So that's not the worst. Khazgroth and Voltron, I think, are actually in their own little tier. I think neither of these are particularly great. Khazgroth is probably going to give you 5 armor, that's about it. Maybe clear a minion. And then Voltron as well, maybe a draw a card, but you're probably not going to be 2 minion based. You will maybe have the Azurite Hawk on board, so its effects won't be useless, but I think you prefer almost all the other Titans, maybe except for Khazgroth. Maybe Khazgroth is the weakest here. Just to, again, put this into context, 1-mana Titan is insane whatever you get. So the random Titan is not, the be-all and end-all. It's get a random great card, okay? So the treasure's really solid. However, going back to the Excavate cards, you want, we've got one Excavate card that's not bad but not great. We've got a decent treasure. The neutrals are not that great. You want a pretty good excavation and maybe another payoff for excavating. Here's the other excavation card from Mage. 2-mana Cryopreservation. Cryopreservation, there we go, I said the word. Frost spell. Freeze an enemy, excavate a treasure. Boy, is this card terrible. How terrible? In the past, Mage had Freezing Potion, freeze an enemy. And this card didn't really see much play at all. So you're kind of valuing, and this is within the class, excavate a treasure as 2 mana. So it's like 2 mana draw a card, which is not a great deal. Maybe you could argue, tier 3 and tier 4, then it is a better deal, but boy, are you losing tempo when you play the Cryopreservation. And also in Standard right now, although in a different class, there is Cold Storage, which is 1 mana freeze a minion, add a copy of it to your hand. So you get to pick a good card, freeze it, and presumably it's going to be a decently statted minion if you want it. And that's for 1 mana less. Is the excavated treasure going to be worth the squeeze of running cryopreservation and the blast mage? I'm not convinced by it versus the tier 1 Sith deck. But, you know, before we make this judgment, what is the other payoff of the Azerite Hawk? Oh, I forgot to mention with this slide as well. The other downside for the Azerite Hawk, in my opinion, is why would you not just run Reverberations, which is what Mage does now. And more often than not, Reverberations copies an opponent's Titan so you can use their effect. Because at the end of the day, the stats don't matter as much in the Titan as the effect of the Titan does. So rather than going through all these loops to get your excavations, to get the Azerite Hawk, so you have to go through, you know, 3 other stages of excavation, get the 4th one, playing 4 really bad cards, and having to draw all 4 of them, to then get a random Titan that may not be that good for you, versus, you know, just reverberating your own Titan or your opponent's Titan. I just think the juice is not worth the squeeze on this one. Anyway, back to excavation again. Here is the other payoff. Your 4-mana 3/5 Reliquary Researcher. Battlecry, if you've excavated twice, cast 2 random Mage Secrets. Okay, this is pretty decent value for the cost. It's a slightly understated 4-cost mini. It's probably statted around like 3.5 mana. And you get 6 mana worth of secrets, but note it is random. You don't get to discover them. Kirin Tor Mage and Secret Mage did see play, and that is, you know, get a free secret basically, but it is one that's in your deck, so you've chosen to put it in your deck. So you can kind of see this as a 0 mana 4/3. Reliquary Researcher, you're getting like 6 mana of stuff for like 4 mana, so it's like -2 mana if you look at it in that twisted way. So you'd argue Reliquary might be better. And also, if you're looking current standard, Hunter is running Titanforge Traps, where they discover a secret, and if they forge it, they do it twice. Which you could see on the Forge is basically 4 mana, cast 4 mana worth of secrets, which is not a great deal, but, you know, Hunter runs it because the secrets in Hunter are pretty good right now. Unfortunately, I have to come back to Reliquary Researcher in a moment, because we have to show off the other secret that's been added with this set. 3 mana, Azerite Vein. Secret, when an enemy plays a card on their... the text on this card is confusing at first. When the enemy plays a card on the turn that it entered their hand, get a copy that costs 0. Boy, is this secret bad. Really, really bad. It's so easy to play around this card. I just can't believe it exists, honestly. Obviously, there are some high rolls in here. Your opponent might excavate a treasure and want to play it onto the board quickly, in which case if you get a 0 mana copy of one of their treasures, that is fantastic news, obviously. Especially if you get, you know, the Azerite Snake, which I think will be running around the meta on day 1. They steal your health, you steal it back. Also, the quick draw cards. I think this is kind of why the secret exists. Because quick draw, you want to play it as soon as it enters your hand, so the Azerite Vein counts as quick draw. Unfortunately, there's no quick draw card I've seen so far that I think is actually good, and will see any play in a competitive tier 1 or tier 2 deck right now. Therefore, I think the Azerite Vein is awful. It's 3 mana, do nothing. Excellent. And it's so easy to play around. You just don't play a card that entered your hand on that turn, or if you do, you give them a 1 mana card or a 2 mana card maybe that is not very useful for Mage, and they spent 3 mana for... what? A 1 mana discount on a spell or a minion? Terrible, terrible secret. Which now takes me back to the Reliquary Researcher. If we look at the secret pool, or will be when this comes out, there are 6 secrets. 2 of them are excellent. Objection and Counterspell. Explosive, I think, sits somewhere in the middle. And then you have Vengeful Visage, Ice Barrier, and Azerite Vein. Honestly, Azerite Vein deserves to be in its own tier, like 3 or 4 below. But Visage and Ice Barrier aren't particularly good either. So, when you look at this, it is cast 2 random Mage Secrets. 33% of the time, you're going to get a good secret out of the 2 of them. 50% of the time, it's going to be bad, which is not a great deal. It could be made a little bit sweeter, though, if you're running a secret Mage deck, which I think is sitting somewhere around tier 4 right now, with Orion Mansion Manager, because irrespective of how bad the secrets are, as long as they can proc, Orion is good. Unfortunately, Orion is... Okay, the good thing about Orion is There are some secrets that are harder to play around than others. Vengeful Visage, Ice Barrier, and Azerite Vein are probably the 3 easiest to play around, so you're probably going to kill it before these 3 effects proc, regardless. And this brings me back to the question, what in God's Earth deck would you run all these in? Because if you're going to run Reliquary Researcher towards a secret Mage package, which maybe that is the best place you could do it, get some early value, early tempo, and just try and beat your opponent down with oppressive secrets, stop them from doing anything. Well, that's unfortunate because Blast Mage Minor is very expensive and more control-orientated, whereas the secret package is tempo. Cryopreservation. This is more value-orientated than anything else. A bit of control in there, but it's a very slow card. And then the Azerite Hawk is not control, really. It's more value. Sure, you can get some better control options, but some of them are not particularly good. So I think all in all, this confused package would have to be a value mage package, which is really, really unfortunate because this legendary exists in the game, Sith, who will steamroll your control value deck. Because Sith don't care like what cards you've got in your hand. You can have all the Titans you want in the world, but if your health is, not above 50 or 60, she's going to machine gun you down with the Rainbow deck. So by virtue of that, I don't think the Excavation package will see any reasonably... How do I want to say this? I think you'll see some play, because I think the archetype could be a little bit fun, getting the random Titans. Everyone likes playing value decks, but I don't think it will be a tier 1, 2, or even 3 deck. I think it will sit below those tiers. Then we go on to some other cards. Heatwave. 2 mana... Fire spell. Deal 2 damage to an enemy minion and its neighbor. Its neighbors, even. Quick draw, you do it to all enemies instead. So Heatwave, if you don't quick draw it, is 2 shooting stars packaged together. Wow! That's humongous, right? I mean, packaging the 2 cards together is, better than having them 2 separately, so Heatwave is better than Shooting Star, but Shooting Star sees 0 play. If you quick draw Heatwave, i.e. enters your turn hand on that turn and you play it, you're getting Consecration for 1 mana less. That's not good enough. Consecration, it doesn't see much play in Paladin. It only sees play in your slower Paladin decks like your Kangors, Dancing Paladins, and that's only because there's not that many good control spells in Paladin. And you frequently see it combined with a quality, because Consecration alone is typically not good enough to clear the board. Therefore, Heatwave, which is... It has a harder condition to get off to give you this 1 mana discount, and you don't have a quality in Mage, we'll see 0 play. I just don't believe this will be a good enough card. The only way Heatwave sees play is if there is a particularly aggressive deck out there that you're happy doing its base effect, 2 damage and 2 damage to its neighbors, just to keep yourself in the game. That's the only way Heatwave sees play, and I think there's just better options in Mage. If you can live for a little bit longer, you can always use Fire Sale at 4 mana, does 3 to all. You've also got the Cosmic Keyboard you're competing with, which in its own right is a form of control by the fact you're casting spells and getting minions with the spells. Like, you're casting, let's say you play your Cosmic Keyboard, you coin into a Cold Case. Hey, you've got 8 worth of stats. That's better than Heatwave, so... Yeah, I'm not convinced Heatwave will see any play. It certainly won't go into the Sith deck. Now we get to at least a card I think could be humoured to go into a deck, but I don't think it will be a good deck again. We have the 10 mana fire spell, Sunset Volley. Deal 10 damage randomly split among all enemies, and then summon a random 10 cost minion. Okay, well, this is going to depend again on how good the 10 cost mana pool is. Mage has 1 10 cost minion. Do you remember DJ Manastorm? Neither did I. Well, he could be pulled out by your Sunset Volley, which is an understated 10 cost minion, so that's not a good result. However, Neutral has some really good 10 cost cards, actually. Thaddeus would be a decent get. That is a reasonable stat line for 10 mana. Plus might discount some of your other spells in hand or other minions. Neptulon is obviously pretty good. And Stoneborn General is also pretty good. That's a sticky minion to get on the board. However, you might be thinking, I'm a little bit mean to Mage so far. Where I could see this being played, at least experimented with, is if you remember about a year ago, just as we entered this cycle, or exited the previous one of the big decks at the time was Box Mage, or Big Spell Mage, if you want to call it that, where you would cheat out huge value spells. You'd get the Draconic Amulet, right, that gave you 2 random dragons, and Puzzle Box of Yog's Throne, which was 9 mana cast, 20 mana worth of spells at your opponent. And there were other tools with that to, help it go along. DJ Manastorm threatened, and this is kind of why I put it on this slide, threatened that there might be a big spell archetype coming in the future, but we have been lacking big spells. Sunset Volley is here. Could there be a DJ Manastorm big spell deck? I don't think so, but it's at least something to think about, right? So if you play DJ Manastorm onto the board, it sets the cost of all your spells in your hand to 0, and after you cast one, the other ones cost 1 more. If you DJ Manastorm into Sunset Volley, you're getting... it's hard to assign exactly what 10 damage split amongst all enemies is. I'm sure there's a card effect like that. But my gut feeling, it's something around 5 mana-ish worth of cost. So in total, you're getting like a... DJ Manastorm, you could probably say is like 8 mana. Then a 5 mana card on top of that, plus a 10 mana card that's randomly generated. You could say that package is like 20-ish mana, a bit more than 20 mana. That's pretty good. That might blow out some decks, especially if you're getting like Stoneborn Generals that are hard to clear. Or you get Thaddeus, because then your other cheap spells will be odd costs, so you'll play another one on top of that. You can also make this cheaper because Barbaric Sorceress is still in the set right now. So you could swap one of your big spells at the Sunset Volley with one of your opponent's spells that are almost certainly going to be less than a 10 mana spell. Now, unfortunately, I think where this falls apart is you kind of need another big spell. And ideally, you'd want some other big spell lovers. And currently, Mage is lacking that. Sadly, DJ Manastorm is a legendary, so you only get one of them. The other big spells we've got right now are Arcane Defenders, which is, gives you some taunt minions, and some people in Big Spell Mage did run an Arcane Defenders in there just to try and live. Fireland's Portal is also in the set, and you can then go down even further to, like, Deathborn and stuff like that. I just don't think the big spells and the support are quite there yet, but, you might want to try something like this. The other downside to this Big Spell Mage deck, especially if you're running Barbaric Sorceress, is that you might want to run cheaper spells, but then your Barbaric Sorceress is worse. So the downside of Big Spell Mage in the past was that you ran no cheap spells, so you need minions to keep you alive. Now there's some decent neutral minions and some decent mage minions, including like the Elemental package, which might be able to keep you alive until this late game state, but I don't think it's going to come to fruition, sadly. Now we get to another spell, Stargazing, 2 mana arcane spell. Draw a different arcane spell so it can't find itself. If you play it this turn, it casts twice. Okay, again, like all the other things from Mage, it depends how good the pool of arcane spells is if this card's going to be good. Just to give you some of them, and this is not all of them, obviously. Arcane Bolt, that sees quite a lot of play in Mage right now, especially in what I'm just going to call Plink Mage. But what I mean by this is like the Vexalis, Aegewin, generate a ton of Arcane Bolts and plink down your opponent's face with it. Stargazing probably will see play in that deck. If you get the Arcane Bolt, it's very cheap. Very easy to play it on the same turn as Stargazing. So for 3 mana, you draw your Arcane Bolt, and it will go off 2 times. And ideally, you'll be at, like, your Mana Thirst 8 already, so you'll do 6 damage. That, in total, is pretty good, honestly. There's also mean things you could do if you put Rewind in the deck. Stargazing would find Rewind. If you played Rewind, and you'd only played Stargazing, your Rewind would find 2 Stargazings. So you'd be increasing the number of Stargazings you had, which might be important if you cast this other arcane spell. Do you remember Light Show? Very briefly was a thing in Nargamage until Nargamage got nerfed. Another really good card for Stargazing to duplicate. And this brings me to another archetype that I think might actually be a thing, or at least tested. I could see there being some sort of Light Show Vexalis, Plinky Mage deck that will compete with the Sith deck. I don't know which one's best. I've got a good idea that it's going to be the Sith deck, so when I rate these cards, that's going to be what I think of. But you could easily see if you like have this rewind in your deck as well, stargazing, getting a light show, playing the light shows, rewind, you may get the stargazing, get another light show, even rewinding the light show again and playing the light show. Then there's also volume up is an arcane spell as well. I've not included it on here. You could volume up to get more copies of light show. I mean, the list's endless, and eventually you could play Grandmaster Romath and just light show the opponent down. I think there is definitely a world where that is a thing that could happen. Also, just to note as well, stargazing will work with Vexalis. So I put Vexalis on here. Stargazing would go off twice. You would draw 2 arcane spells, which is pretty good in its own right. 2 mana, draw 2. And if you cast it, it will go off twice. Now, I don't know how that works with Vexalis, because Vexalis is your arcane spells cast twice, but I assume it still only goes off twice, right? You don't get 4 times the Vexalis? Because that would be insane. I'm pretty certain that you'll only get it twice still. But Stargazing Vexalis will be good to draw you 2 cards, at the very least. In terms of other cards, if you try and fit this into your Rainbow deck, which I actually don't think it will fit into the Rainbow deck, but maybe I'm wrong, Wisdom of Norganic could reasonably be a 0 mana card, in which case you could play Stargazing into Wisdom to get 2 mana, draw 4 cards. That's really good. Really, really good, in fact. And then we mentioned this Big Spell Mage. If you try and run Big Spell Mage, and maybe you do keep some cheaper spells in there and you don't put in the Barbaric Sorcerer package, if you can Stargaze into Arcane Defenders on like 10 mana, that's a pretty big board, right, for 10 mana. 4, 5, 6 golems with taunt that can't be targeted. That's pretty annoying to deal with. Unfortunately, this is again the dark border as Sith appears. I'm not convinced this deck is better than Sith. Sith has got some armor generation in it. This deck might have armor generation in it. It's just so hard to elaborate on because Sith generates so many random cards, and some of the random cards are going to be insanely good versus the deck you're playing, and some of them are also discovered so you can pick better cards. It's going to be whichever deck is more consistent, and I think Sith will be more consistent. Another card that might see play in that deck, the legendary for Mage, one of the legendaries revealed so far. 4 mana, 2/5. Typhalon, I might be pronouncing your name wrong. Typhalon, Bloodwatcher. Cards that didn't start in your deck cost 4 less, but not less than 1. They're learning, the Hive Mind, the Hearthstone team are learning to not let spells go to 0 mana. Again, where would this card see play? Well, in a Romath deck. Romath rewards you for playing spells that didn't start in your deck. Typhalon also rewards you for that. If you can generate multiple copies of Light Show, you can start plinking people with Light Shows for 1 mana instead. That's a pretty good deal. Also, Void Scripture, which is kind of insane right now. You would discover a spell that, if you had the mana to play it, its effect would go off at a random enemy, but then you could probably play it on the same turn as well, because it would get a 4 mana discount. Pretty good deal, right? Unfortunately for Typhalon, and why I don't think this card is going to see it, it'll see some play in this plinky Mage, as I'm calling it, but I don't think it will make its way into Sith Mage. It's the bottom criteria, but not less than 1. So this won't work with Arcane Bolts generated from Arcane Worms. It will stay as 1 cost. And at the end of the day, Sith Mage beats people down with 1 cost spells. So why would you discount a heavier cost spell to plink them down? I don't think it makes sense to me that you would play... Well, you can't even play Sith and Typhalon on the same turn, right? That's 10 mana, so you'd require a minion to live on the board for a turn. It just won't work. Whereas Typhalon with, the light shows and maybe Vexalis, maybe that just sees some play. Also, just as a note, this says cards, not spells, so it does work with other surprising things. Like Mech Mage. Mech Mage discovers a lot of cards, a lot of mechs. If you have Typhalon on the board, when you're discovering these mechs, they're going to cost 4 less, and for mechs, that's probably going to mean they're going to cost 1, so you could conceivably at like 10 mana, maybe the last resort, play Typhalon, maybe play your Sunken Sweeper, and then just vomit out, especially your Sunken Sweeper, which will cost 1 then, and then just vomit out mechs onto the board. It might see play in that type of minion mage deck. It may also see play in Elemental Mage. They got 1 card, at least until we see the final card, which I think, my gut is telling me that the other legendary for Mage is going to be an Elemental, because there's a lot of support for elementals in the neutral package. Mage has got a lot of elemental support already, but they only got this with one card. 4 mana 3/2 elemental, Overflow Surger, Battlecry. Summon a copy of this for each turn in a row you played an elemental. Now, when I did the neutral reveal, I mentioned that there's a lot of elemental mage support out there already. And it would even sort of bit of play. It's more like, I think, a tier 4 deck right now, elemental mage. But the seeds are there for this deck to sprout and flourish. And with something like, Tathlon, because a lot of the elementals, especially the mage elementals, can discover other cards, you could conceivably put Tathlon in there to get, your Synthesizer, which gives you a 1/2/3 cost minion. You could play that with Tathlon and then get 1/1/1. You kind of discount 4 mana. Is that great? Possibly not good enough, but it's at least worth thinking about. Eroded Sediment, discovering an elemental from the past. Again, that could be good with Tathlon. Tathlon. There's some pretty big minions from the past. Getting a 4 mana discount on that if that stays on the board, that's pretty good. Going back to the Overflow Surger, I think it's very reasonable for Mage especially, as well as, Shaman that we mentioned, to play an elemental on almost every single turn. Maybe not 1 for Mage though, but certainly 2 onwards. So you can imagine playing 2 cards before playing your Surger on 4, and getting 9/6 worth of stats out on 4. That's a pretty good deal, honestly. I think that's going to be the best place for Overflow Surger to work, where you just play it as a tempo deck, and you just play this out on 4 for 2 copies, rather than playing till, your turn 8s, your turn 9s, and filling the board with this. I don't think that is going to be quite as good. But still, if you top deck this, that's a great top deck, right? If you've played an elemental each turn. And bearing in mind, you've also got the Azurite Giant to reward you for this, playing elementals every single turn. So I think this is a really good deal. Also, just as a note, we've mentioned this before, you can bounce one of these back as well with Saloon Brewmaster for even more value. It lets you play another elemental in a future turn, and it buffs them, and this is a copy of it, so you'll get 5/4s instead. That might be a thing, Bouncing elementals back, playing elementals every single turn, getting the Azurite Giant as some sort of tempo mage deck. I can definitely see that being tested. I think it might be, honestly, the most highly prospect, or high prospect, I'm struggling with English now, the highest prospect of a deck coming out of this expansion for Mage is the Overflow Surger. And then Elemental Mage just getting like that little bump up and maybe gets into towards the tier 3 level, maybe the lowest end of tier 2. Unfortunately, though, it's competing with Elemental Inspiration. It's back to Sith Mage again. And this is kind of why I said the Overflow Surger waiting, I don't think it's going to be worth it. If you wanted a big board fill, Sith Mage already has that with the Elemental Inspiration. It's better than the Overflow Surger. Arguably better, I suppose. So I think you're going to be more inclined to play this for tempo instead. As I said, there's one legendary card waiting for Mage. We'll do that with a future reveal. I'm hoping it's an Elemental Mage, and a really good Elemental Mage at that. That would then probably tie together this Elemental package, and I think that would be a decent deck. Other than that, maybe some sort of big spell or big spell enabler. I think that could be a positive thing. But I struggle right now to see that any of these cards are going to overthrow the Rainbow Sith deck, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, I was wrong last time. I said it was Demon Hunter today. It's Demon Hunter tomorrow, so we'll check out the Demon Hunter cards tomorrow. A class that is really languishing right now in the old doldrums. Although it's been played, was being played at the Masters Tour. I don't know if any of the decks have survived, but they saw a little bit of play. And I'll be intrigued to see what support they get, because they seem to be kind of aligning towards right now a spell Demon Hunter-like deck where, you have, what's his name? The new legendary, like Jortin, I can't remember his name. But they've got this card that, when you draw a spell, you get to cast a copy of it. So I'm intrigued to see what big spells will come out of Demon Hunter. And hopefully that can turn the meta maybe in their favour. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this one, really like and subscribe. Everything helps me out. I'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.